Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the World Chess Championship 2021, contested by Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Game 6 was one for the ages, the longest ever game played in a World Chess Championship match at 137 moves in nearly 8 hours. Between then and the next game, the players have about 15 hours to rest, recover, eat, sleep, and everything you need to do to get prepared for a World Championship match. The question is, will Jan be able to strike back? If I've spoiled the Game 6 result for you, what the hell are you doing watching Game 7 before Game 6? And before we jump into the game, I want to thank all of you. At the time of recording Game 7's recap, the Game 6 one has 600,000 views. That is absolutely mind-boggling considering it's been recorded a day ago. You guys' support has been unreal. Some of you watched that entire game live, or most of it, and then still came back to bring some energy to the recap. It was an awesome day for chess. It really was. The chess world was buzzing. Today, at least where I'm sitting on Twitter, Magnus Carlsen was trending, which is like amazing. So, I mean, yeah, like, let's see if Game 7 can maintain the level of energy. I doubt we're going to get something even crazier, but Jan begins with e4. Now, the reason why e4 is a bit of a surprise, not a bit of a surprise for this game, is because you don't have a lot of time to do something new. You got to stick with what you know best, right? And we know what we're going to get. We are going to get a Spanish, and we are going to get an invitation to play a Marshall, which is not moving the d-pawn and trying to go d5 in one go if white plays c3. In game 1, we saw h3, and in the last 2 games, we've seen the move a4. And that is what we see again. Rook b8, and we kind of, we're getting some a takes b5, a takes b5, and the difference between the game we saw 2 games ago is this. Jan puts his knight on c3. Now, I understand a knight going to c3 instead of a pawn going to c3 for the chess world is like, ooh, ah, wow. And for anybody is like, why are y'all rejoicing? Well, the difference in the 2 setups is that Jan in the last game played c3, inviting Magnus's b-pawn, right? So like offering this exchange of opening up the position. He chooses in this game to go for knight c3. And the reason, okay, I can't draw arrows apparently. And the reason I think is because, again, you just don't have a lot of time. I mean, you don't want to go back to move 1 and play d4. When you don't have a lot of time to prepare in between games and you need to kind of recover from such a grueling game 6, you go with something with basically 0 risk, right? I mean, if you go all out in this game and you lose again, I mean, the match is as good as done. So you need to get something where you will just add a slightly different sprinkle of some sort of seasoning, and then we're gonna kind of do our best. Now, the point of knight c3 is to fight for the d5 square. There are various Spanishes, like all the way back here, that are played with a3, d3, and knight c3. And then ultimately that knight, this bishop, this pawn all fight on that square. And this bishop goes to trade itself for this knight, so black has even less of fighting pieces for the d5 square. The position that we have on the board in front of us, that's not really going to happen because we have some trade already, and bishop g5 is not possible because the move h6 has been made. Here, Magnus plays rook e8 after some thought. We know what the point of rook e8 is. It's obviously to add some sort of defense layer to the center, but it's also to get this bishop to safety back to f8. This is super common. If you don't know much about e4, e5 positions, these positions just simply look like they don't make much sense. Like, why would you spend all this time rerouting your pieces? Well, black is basically waiting for white to come forward. It's that kind of position. Like, white needs to either advance forward with c3, d4. White needs to either reroute this knight and somehow get it on f5, which is a common transport square in the Ruiz structures. Or white needs to play on the queen side. That's the reason you open the queen side, right? So knight d5. And very clearly, Jan goes for a trade of knights. Jan didn't have to play like this. He could have played bishop d2. He could have played bishop e3. But at some point, he would have run out of moves. He needs to do something, either break in the center or transfer the knight, right? So he trades knights. Now, the difference in these positions is the fact that with the knights gone and with the queen standing out here, the queen side is potentially a little bit less stable for black. Like we're looking at moves like this. Not right now. I mean, that would be really nice. But we know that Magnus has moved this knight over in the other game, knight e7, knight g6, where it can go to its own transport square. And when you move the knight to e7, you're going to get c5. And that's like a really kind of common Spanish idea. is once you get all these pieces playing, black equalizes and completely shuts down white's initiative. So we have c3. Now, if you remember, c3 did invite b4 2 games ago. We're going to talk about why Magnus didn't play b4 in this position. But the point of c3 is to obviously repel the knight and also to prepare the move d4. Once again, Jan can also play bishop e3, and Jan could bring this bishop back to c2 before he does this, because we know that Magnus is looking to kind of make that trade on e6 against white's strong bishop. The move b4 is not what Magnus goes for here, because the difference in this position of the traded knights is that this is just simply nice for white. So for example, pawn takes, you don't open your b file at all, right? The bishop pressures here. You don't get bishop to e6 because there is just a fork. And if you try to just play lazy moves like knight e7, I mean, white just comes crashing through the middle. And that's why the queen is here, because white always has this ability to attack it. So in many ways, this system makes a lot of sense for white, right? And that's kind of why b4 is not as strong. By the way, nothing changes if like this occurs. So if you throw in bc prior, this is a better version than what we have just looked at, of course. But this is still very pleasant for white, who still has possibilities to crash through with e5, who can potentially line up laser beam bishops on this diagonal. And I mean, it's a nice position for white. I'm not saying white is winning, but I'm saying it's a nice position. So Magnus is like, I'm not going to open anything. I'm going to play knight e7. Now you would think, why are we not playing rook a7? Rook a7 is of course a decent move, but it's a one mover. I mean, this is probably what Magnus wants anyway, not to mention the fact that rook b7 is still possible. I mean, you could theoretically just trade the rooks. This rook can hang out on a8, but I mean, it's going to get traded, right? So knight e7, Magnus is rerouting the knight to g6, and it's kind of Jan's moment right now. It's kind of Jan's moment to take a pause and think about exactly what black wants in this position. A combination of the moves bishop to e6, knight g6, c5, or c6 to try to stay a little bit more solid. d5 is completely out the window. If you remember that game ago, when Jan had the white pieces, Magnus tried to play with d5 in the middle of the board. It's just not going to happen now because e5 is so weak. And what does Jan want? He wants a combination of bishop to e3, rook infiltrating on the queen side, and the move d4. So Jan thinks for some time. He develops the bishop very actively to e3. Magnus thinks for a bit, and he has some options here. He can move his c-pawn or he can move his bishop. Knight g6 is he can continue this transfer, but here there is actually a very funny move, bishop a7. And yeah, bishop a7 is sort of hilarious because if you play rook here or rook here, I trap your rook. I mean, imagine this in a world championship match. You wouldn't. You wouldn't. It wouldn't happen. But that is why you need to look at forcing moves in chess. Forcing moves can be checks, captures, or in this case, maximum danger attacks. Attacks that put the most value under threat in your position. In this case, that would be the rook because the queen is not attackable. Those are the kind of moves that you need to look at for yourself. Seems elementary at this level, but it's still very important to look at. Now, we have bishop e6 and the critical moment of the game. In the game 2 games ago, we saw Jan miss this opportunity, like to seize the initiative, right? To seize this moment in the game where he could potentially be better. And here he has a plethora, vocab word, of choices. He can do a lot of different things. He can take on e6 and then transfer his rook. He can take on e6 and then play d4. He cannot take on e6 and just play d4. He cannot take on e6 and transfer the bishop back before he plays d4. He can also transfer his rook in. Now, he does in fact choose that pawn advance in the center of the board. But before we go to that pawn advance, in this position, there is, like I said, a lot of options. So if rook to a7 is played here, black plays c5 and sort of the rook is, you know, swinging and missing. Like power hitters in baseball, right? Like the rook is not doing a whole lot. I mean, the pawn wanted to go to c5 anyway. The best move, it seems, is to put the rook on a6. You could do this and prepare d4. But again, now that black's rooks are connected because the bishop has moved, black is going to begin the fight on the a-file. So the whole point of this system is for white to open the a-file. If you don't win the battle on the a-file, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm not even going to give it English words. I'm just going to make noises. The most interesting move in this position seems to be this. I saw Anish Giri pointed this out. I don't know if other commentators did as well. I was only watching Anish then. Rook to a6. A fascinating and very odd move. The point of this move, black cannot easily play c5 because this is going to be under some pressure. Also, you are threatening, in some ways, to transfer the queen behind the rook. Not right away, because you would lose the bishop, but like queen to a1, and you're never going to lose the battle on the a file. And the rook just sort of pressures everything. And perhaps the most fascinating point here is that if black goes for a rook trade, I just said you can't play queen a1, right? Because your bishop hangs. Queen a1 is the best move. If bishop takes bishop, rook takes rook. That's not complicated. But if rook takes rook, look at this. Look at this incredible board geometry. Boop! And it's a fork. And white is winning because white is going to be a pawn up, which at this level is just completely winning. So, okay, I mean, that means that black will not be taking this and instead could go there. And if you take, the knight is hanging. So you would go here. And at this point, I don't know what's going on. But we have imbalance. We have an imbalance of structure. White has lost the h-pawn. Black has lost the b-pawn. A chess is going to get played, all right? But rook a6 was a very interesting idea, potentially. But Jan chooses d4. Jan chooses d4. And now it's up to Magnus to kind of figure out how to liquidate the structure. Magnus takes on d4. Jan snap captures back with the pawn, which makes sense because, I mean, this is very nice. But Fabiano was saying during the broadcast that it feels like Jan should have taken a little bit more time here and not snap taken. Maybe something like knight takes d4. Because this pawn structure at least is a little bit, it has a little bit more life to it. I mean, the structure is inherently E versus D. But for example, if bishop takes b3, queen takes b3, Magnus has to find a very interesting defensive resource here, which is pawn to b4. And that is just fascinating. So if you take this offering, you've now doubled your pawns, right? So you're getting butchered potentially after something like c5. It's just a very complicated game. I mean, Jan has to, like, you know, defend the integrity of his b-pawns. Yeah, I mean, b4 is super interesting. And then c4 to not even take the offering, but transfer the knight to b5 is an opportunity for black and just infiltrate on the queen side. So knight takes d4 seems to be a very serious alternative to getting those two very strong central pawns on E and D, right? Knight takes d4 could have been that moment, but of course, Magnus doesn't necessarily have to do that. He could also play c5, offering this pawn up like this and paralyzing the position, and, you know, knight g6 over here, creating counterplay. I don't know. But Jan chooses to play cd4. So they were calling it a missed opportunity in the practical standpoint, because this gives Magnus bishop takes bishop, knight g6, and who's going to guard e4? Who's going to guard e4? If you play like queen c2, for example, to guard and also attack, Magnus will now succeed in playing c5. We've talked about this. I mean, this is the final move of the whole liquidation process. You know, and then if white like tries to be fancy or whatever and close everything up, I mean, black just has a great position. Like, black will go back to fight on the a file. Black pressures the center. Black's bishop is passive, yes, 100%, but black is super solid. I mean, black has absolutely no weaknesses. So Jan thinks for a little bit and plays rec 1, rook ec1, attacking this pawn. Now e4 looks to be hanging, but there's no reason to even get involved in any of these complications. What does Magnus play? The move that we've been talking about the entire game, c5. Jan plays e5. We have like one brief moment of tension. If de5, the point is to have a pass pawn going to c8. Magnus just slides right past the trouble. And now there's tension right here. And black is going to trade everything off in a moment. Everything is going to get traded, or black is going to even maybe play c4, d5 if given the opportunity. Knight to f4, and the bishop is going to open up again. So Jan says, all right, we live to fight another day. Takes, queen trade, takes, here, here. As you might imagine, the players made a bunch of more moves to get to move 40, and the game ended in a draw on the first moment that they had an opportunity to offer it. A very short recap compared to yesterday, right? I'm not going to sit here and try to fluff this up. The truth is, the synopsis of this game, I think they went back to what they knew best because of how little time and how little energy they had between games 6 and 7. They tried something, perhaps it comes down to just one move, just like the last game came down to basically one move. Maybe Jan would have gotten some more chances with the move knight takes d4, but as it stands, in all the games that Jan has had with the white pieces, which is 1, 3, 5, and 7, he has not gotten something practical to challenge Magnus. Now, people are saying that the way Magnus has been playing with the black pieces, and the white pieces, is he's taking a little bit of risk, pawn sacrifices and whatnot to create chances. But now that he's up 1-0, he is going to stick to what works. Or in this case, he's up 4-3, but I'm saying in the wins and losses column. He's going to stick to what works. He is not going to take as much risk. He is going to be as solid as possible. Jan does not have many white games remaining. We are at the halfway point of the match. Tomorrow's game, when Magnus has white again, is a big game for Jan. Hopefully he can hold. We're going to see what Magnus' strategy is going to be. Is he going to come out guns blazing, try to take a 2-win lead, or is he just going to try to stay solid? I don't know. We're going to find out. In long matches, we tend to have games that are like this sometimes, when the players just need a break. They just need that break, and I think that's what we saw today. My prediction is, either we are not going to see another anti-martial, so Jan will play an Italian, or he will play a Scotch, or a King's Gambit. I highly doubt that's going to happen, or he'll play something else, C4, D4. But interesting stuff. A little bit of a downer today, but sometimes you need that to rest and recover, and we'll see what happens in game number 8. I appreciate you for hanging out with me for the 16 minutes of this recap, and I'll see you for the next round. Get out of here.